Welcome back to another Pausecast dedicated to supporting your efforts to pause during the day to recenter and help you develop inner peace. We are your hosts, Esterlee, Molyneux,
and Dr. Ryan Stolworthy.
Welcome.
Prepare to be inspired by an upcoming episode of the Pausecast featuring none other than Jane Clayson Johnson, with a rich background as a respected journalist, author, and advocate.
Jane's journey is one that you won't want to miss, from her formative years in broadcasting to her trailblazing interviews, including her insightful book, Silent Souls Weeping. She has consistently showcased her commitment to understanding the diverse facets of the human experience. Join us as we explore her incredible story, delving into her triumphs over adversity, her cultivation of empathy, and her profound contributions to our world. Join us as we explore her incredible story, delving into her triumphs over adversity, her cultivation of empathy, and her profound contributions to our world. Jane, we're so excited to have you with us today on the Pausecast. I'm Esterlee Molyneux.
And I'm Ryan Stolworthy.
Well, it's so wonderful to be with both of you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
We really look forward to you coming to Logan in the end of October 27th, to our Utah Faith Summit on Mental Health.
Yes, I'm excited to come back to Utah and to be with all the folks in Logan. It looks like a fantastic event, and you've really booked some wonderful presenters, and I look forward to being additive to that conversation. So thank you.
Wonderful. I know one of the things that's been really exciting for us is when we've mentioned to people that you were coming, they were really taken back and excited. Obviously, your many efforts, not only in your journalistic career, but especially your wonderful efforts in the mental health realm now, and the book Silent Souls Weeping have been really loved and appreciated. We're excited for it. What's made you feel comfortable with coming to Logan to participate in this conference?
Well, any chance I get to come back to Utah, I take it. And to be honest, I got an email from Esterlee, who's sitting right next to you, and I get a lot of invitations, and I have a family, and I'm taking care of my mom, and there's some life issues that are happening in our world, but I got this email from Esterlee, and I just felt there was something that just made me want to participate in the efforts that she was putting together. And so that's really why I'm here. And I hope that I can be helpful and, share my story and some of the things that I've learned along this journey. I'm really looking forward to being there.
That's amazing. Tell us about your family situation right now. You have some children, you're helping your mom, you're married, you're living in Boston. Yeah, we live in Boston. We've lived here for about 20 years. I came here from New York, where I was still working, and then before that, Los Angeles. But we love Boston. We've been here, about 20 years, as I say. So we have two younger children. Our daughter, Ella, just started her sophomore year at Washington University in St. Louis. And our son, William, is a senior in high school. He just started school today, his first day of senior year. So he's really excited about that, looking at colleges. And then we have three older kids who are married. Two are married, one's in medical school. We have 5 little grandchildren. So we're on the go, and I take care of my mom, as many folks do in this sandwich generation. I'm helping her as she's been quite sick, so there's a lot going on. That's a lot of work to take care of a senior parent. I know my family, we were privileged to be able to do it. It was challenging in a lot of ways, but it was also a major thing that we've cherished in our life, being able to have that time with our parent in this stage.
Yeah, it's very difficult, but it is an honor, actually. It's an honor to be able to care for someone in their older years and final years, so it's been a privilege and something that I will always be grateful that I had the opportunity to do.
Wonderful.
Well, Jane, maybe you can give us just a brief overview of your career as a journalist.
Oh, sure. So I actually started my career in journalism as a student at BYU years ago, and graduated to work at KSL Television in Salt Lake City. So I was a young reporter and anchor there at KSL for many years, and then got a call from an agent in New York who had seen my work on someone else's videotape back in the days when we had videotapes, who had sent them a tape to get a job in a bigger market. And so that person didn't get the job in the bigger market, but I did, and moved to Los Angeles to work on World News Tonight. I did a lot of international reporting at ABC, traveled around the world for many different events, the NATO airstrikes in Kosovo, the refugee crisis in Macedonia, the fall of the Suharto government in Jakarta, Indonesia. There was just a lot, as well as national stories. I did presidential campaigns and such, and then moved on to New York, where I hosted the morning program at CBS with a guy named Bryant Gumbel, who was a former Today Show host. Those of an older generation will remember him. And did that for a few years, had some incredible opportunities, was on the air on 9/11, just interviewed from start to finish every day, kind of the biggest newsmakers of the day, and was very privileged to have that experience to really see the world up close and see the news and be part of the news every day. After a few years of that, I decided to move to Boston. And my husband lived here, my future husband lived here, and I moved here, and I was 37 years old and wanted to have a family, so I left my career behind in New York to move to Boston, sort of not knowing what I was going to be doing, and had 2 children in a couple of years, and have loved that season of my life, really dedicating myself to my family, and then wrote a couple of books after that, and do a lot of work now with causes that I really am passionate about. Education, mental health. So life is full and good, and it hasn't always been easy, but it's been an incredible journey for which I'm very grateful.
It's a wonderful summary. Thank you so much. In that stage in your life, did you ever experience any form of depression or anxiety or any other mental health challenges? Were they just situational?
I hadn't experienced depression until after I had my children. I had the sort of typical ups and downs of life, but nothing that was debilitating, nothing that would take me down, nothing that a good cry or 2 or 3 wouldn't get me out of. And when I experienced depression, clinical depression for the first time, I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know how to explain what was happening to me because I'd never experienced it before. And so the shame of feeling these emotions and this sort of looking at life through some sort of fog or haze or just differently than I always had really surprised me, because I was living the life that I had always dreamed of. I was living the life that I had always wanted. I had 2 beautiful children and a loving husband, and I had a fulfilling life. So when I had these feelings of darkness and sadness and, just overwhelming guilt and just a whole host of things I'd never experienced before, it really scared me. And it caused me to feel a lot of shame. Like, what am I doing wrong? Why is this happening to me? And what am I doing that's causing this, right? Which I do believe is a common theme for people who are going through this. So that's what really spurred me after I was able to sort of come out of all this, that was what spurred me to really start talking about it and to open up about my experience, because I had a platform with which I knew I could share my own experience and hopefully help others who were going through something similar.
So a couple of questions, Jane. Did you start experiencing this in like postpartum times, or was it well after your children were toddlers, or what was the timing of that?
Yeah, I didn't experience postpartum depression, gratefully. I had difficult births, but I was never diagnosed with postpartum depression. The timing of it was when my children were slightly older than babies and toddlers. So, it was certainly something post-birth that happened to me, but nothing that I can pinpoint a reason for. There was nothing sort of physiologically that was happening, and certainly nothing environmentally that would have changed, that it would have brought me to a sort of a different place. So sometimes, as you know, Dr. Ryan, these things happen, and depression comes when we least expect it, and it does not discriminate. And even for someone who has resources, I had the capability to sort of help myself, but didn't know how and didn't know what to do. And so, this is why I'm so passionate about helping others who don't recognize it, who don't know what to do, and who don't have maybe the resources or the understanding about, where to turn.
In that process, when did you get help? Or was somebody telling you, Jane, you need to get help, like your husband? Or was it something that you just tried to plow through? Or what was that process like?
Oh, I definitely tried to plow through it. There's no question. I mean, and that's part of the danger of depression and mental illness and, these clinical mental health problems, is that I think so often we do try to sort of just mow forward and plow ahead. And, I'd show up to most of my activities with a big smile on my face, church on Sunday, there I was with my perfectly, clothed and bathed children, and just putting a smile on my face and acting like nothing was wrong. And then, you get home and you collapse for the rest of the afternoon. And it was one day, I write about this in my book, it was one afternoon where I just thought that, I couldn't go on anymore. And I had these feelings on and off of real serious clinical depression. I had thought that, my children deserved a better mother, that my husband certainly could find a better wife than me, that, people around me, I wouldn't be missed. These really sort of, now I think about them as, it was just unreasonable. But at the time, I really knew that this was true. I really felt it. And one day it sort of came crashing down on me, and I got in my car and I started driving. And I got to a place about, 45 minutes from my house. And I just parked the car and I just thought, this is going to be it. And I'll never forget, there were some people that were passing by sort of ahead of me in my car, and they were walking or cycling. And then I remember one fellow came over to my car, and he could clearly see that I was in distress. I was crying, and he just kind of tapped on the window, and he says, are you okay? Is there anyone that you could talk to? He didn't know me. I didn't know him, it was. And so, long story short, I did call my husband that afternoon, and I did tell him sort of what had happened, and it just came out of me like a flood of emotion often does. And the next day, he took me to get help, and he took me to not one but two doctors ultimately. And that's how I really started to get help and to seek treatment. And I think often, when people are struggling and suffering, that is what is needed, is someone who's on the outside who can kind of step in and take control and really help. But so often they don't know. And so that's the point of my message, is to sort of bust the stigma of all this and to be open about our challenges and not feel like we're so perfect or, can't release the struggles that we have in our lives, because if we don't share and we don't tell someone what's going on, we can never get help.
It's just heartwarming that man came over to your car, noticed the situation, and reached out.
Right.
What a neat
a stranger.
thing.
It was a stranger,
Yeah.
And so all of us can be on the lookout, always can be, mindful of what we see and what's going on around us, because so often, as my book, the title of my book states, and I believe it, so many are silent souls weeping. Silently we struggle, and we kind of, we close off, and we decide, we're going to do this and we're going to make it work, and somehow we're going to get through it, and it's just not the way it goes.
Jane, I feel like you have brought up so many important points. First of all, you said you were living your dream life. And in my years of working in mental health, I often hear people saying, I have so much. Why do I feel so unhappy? Or what's wrong with me? I don't have enough gratitude, when truly there's something physical going on in our brains and our bodies that are causing these feelings. Can you speak just a little bit more to that, please?
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest thing that I had to learn and really internalize, is that these are physiological changes. These are chemical changes. Dr. Ryan, you're nodding your head. You know this. This is something I'm not making this up. This is not something that I dreamed up. It's actually physically happening in my brain, or it was. And, until we start to understand that these are chemical changes, that our body is actually, we are physically under duress. We can't start to understand that this is not something I can will myself out of. This is not something that I can just decide one day to, snap my fingers and it's going to go away if I just try hard enough. It just doesn't work like that, and sometimes there has to be outside intervention. There has to be, as in my case, there has to be medication, certainly therapy. I describe it as sort of stepping on a staircase, walking up a staircase, and you stop. And there's where the depression is. And you look over the edge and you just feel like, wow, if I take one more step, I'm going to head right into the abyss. And that's where the desperation comes, and the feelings of despair. So when you get that medication, you get that therapy, you get those additional treatments that help you find that next step that you can take so that you continue moving forward in your life, that's what really can often really make the difference. That's what changes lives. So we got to get over this. I can say it forever. We're not going to plow through it. We're not going to fix it ourselves. We're not going to will ourselves forward. We need help. We need help.
I think a follow-up question to that, Jane, is I just heard you saying things like, I felt like my family would be better off without me. And I think we get into these cognitive thought errors, and coupled with that, there's a fallacy that oftentimes people feel like those who are contemplating perhaps ending their life are being very selfish, when in fact, actually, the thought process is usually one of trying to support their family or alleviate their family members or loved ones from the problem that they feel they are, if that makes sense. So can you speak just a little bit more about that?
Well, I think you're exactly right, and I think it's a misnomer, and I think historically we've sort of incorrectly decided that someone who wants to take their life is selfish, and as you say, it could not be further from the truth. Someone who's in a place where they feel like they have no other options, that person is in a place of despair. That person is in a place of darkness that many could never understand. And the only way out in their mind is that option. So I remember speaking to one doctor who said, the reason we have to talk about this, and the reason especially we have to talk about suicide and suicidal tendencies, is because it gives people other options. Because it opens the door to other possibilities. Talking about suicide, talking about depression does not cause someone to have depression, does not cause someone to take their own lives. Many times it opens the door, it opens the aperture to possibly getting treatment, to getting help in other ways. So the more we can be vocal about it and articulate, what's going on, and reach out to those around us in our communities, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our families, reaching out and offering a listening ear. Sometimes that's all you've got. One of my favorite stories was of a young woman who had a teenage daughter, who was just collapsing in this unexplained grief. Up to that point, I think she was in 9th grade. She'd had everything. She was an A student. She'd had all of the opportunities, happy, had a lot of friends, and then all of a sudden, something happened. And she just turned. And she would not come out of her bedroom. She would not go to school. She would not engage. No one knew what to do. And her mother, who was completely beside herself, completely without resources, didn't know what had she done wrong as a mother. We take this on ourselves. She started talking to people and asking for help. And a woman in her community came over one day and she said, "May I tell you my story?" And she shared an almost identical story to what her daughter was going through. Just this dark period of her life as a young girl, and going into her room one day and crawling in a ball, getting under, I think it was under the bed or in the closet somewhere, and just writing a note and saying, "That's it, I'm ending it." And the fact that this mother could share with this other mother, she was then able to talk to this daughter, this girl, and share her experience, changed a lot. Because this girl could see, someone has been through what I'm going through. She could relate, and now look, she made it through. She has a happy life. She somehow overcame. And that partnership was created, and that connection was started. So, I am all for people sharing their stories and helping others, because there's so many of us who can do that, and there's so many of us who need it.
Do you know, it's just really powerful what you were told. You need other options. When you get in that moment of despair, and the only option that you think there is that you're going to alleviate everybody else's because you're going to take your life. It's just interesting that, like you'd pointed out, there are so many other options, and those options are hopeful, and they do help you. And I think one of the greatest, most interesting thing is the brain is an organ, and like you've pointed out already, it has a physiology and a neurochemistry, and yet we are really, really hard on that organ for some reason, and I think it's because a lot of it is our thought process. But when somebody has heart disease, we're all very compassionate about heart disease. When somebody has a sick gallbladder, let's remove the gallbladder. But the brain is a completely different entity, it seems, for society or for individuals that we're really, really hard on. And yet it's an organ like the other organs that we're compassionate towards when they get sick.
Right. That's exactly right, Dr. Ryan. I mean, I talk about that in my book. I have a thyroid deficiency. Would I ever consider not taking thyroid supplements to help me with my thyroid problem? No. If you have a diabetes, you take insulin. I mean, if you have a broken arm, you go to the doctor and you get a cast. And then you have physical therapy. I mean, you're exactly right. We have all these other physical ailments which we don't think twice about treating. But for some reason, this stigma has lasted for such a long time about mental illness that somehow we've done something to cause it, that somehow, it's our doing. I don't know. You can list them 1,000 different ways, but we've got to get over that because it is an organ of the body that should be treated just like any other organ that we have.
One of the challenges is that there's a lot of evidence scientifically that cognitive behavioral therapy and autonomic regulatory methods are so much more powerful even at times for people than medications. As a matter of fact, medications are prescribed frequently, which definitely there are indications and reasons for it. And a lot of people feel like if I have this pill, then my life is going to be better. When the reality is that might be a stepping stone and that might be a bridge for that individual to use, but they also need to really mentally learn skills and get tools to be able to help them go through the process and to be able to get to the other side of the bridge that the medication might help them for. And a lot of people say, I got my SSRI, I'm going to be good. And the reality is for young people, it can make things worse sometimes if they're not getting the mental treatment and therapy that they need. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, you have to have the tools alongside the medication. I mean, and the other thing is, one size does not fit all, and the medication that works for one person certainly does not work for the next. That doesn't work for the next. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's a trial and error of getting the right cocktail, and you don't have to be on the medication forever. Sometimes it's an immediate need, but it doesn't need to go on forever. And I think some people are afraid of that. Like if I get on that medicine, will I need it, for the next 20 years? Some people do, but most people don't, and that obviously is a conversation that you have with your doctor. But you're right. The tools that we need to learn to cope with some of these challenges, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. There are lots of ways, lots of tools, as we say, tools in our toolkit that you can pull out in times of distress to cope with life. It's not just, the pill is not just the answer.
Very well said.
Jane, I'm wondering a little bit about your husband and his support of you. And I have to say, in the book, I so enjoyed reading all the different perspectives that people shared. But the interview that was really fascinating to me is when you interviewed your husband. And we're so vulnerable about that. I'm just curious, what advice or hope can you give to people who have loved ones who are silently suffering, or those who have ongoing mental illness, when they're trying to be as loving and kind, as supportive as possible, and they're also feeling really tired and overwhelmed and wondering, if they're going to feel happiness again? Is there an end in sight to this suffering?
Yeah. So for my book, I interviewed more than 150 people all over the country. I had literally hundreds and hundreds of stories to explain and describe the experience of mental illness, from postpartum depression to kids and teens who suffered, to there's a chapter on suicide. There's a chapter on missionaries coming home early from their service because of mental health challenges. There's a chapter also, importantly, on what I call, people who don't have mental illness, who don't have depression, who've never experienced it, and who live with someone or love someone who does. And that's the category that my husband falls into, because, he's about as steady and even. It's just his chemistry. He never gets too high and he never gets too low, you know. I'm more like this. He's just a little bit like this, you know. And so he didn't understand. He just really didn't know what to do beyond taking me to the doctors, beyond helping me and getting me into the hands of the professionals. He didn't really understand, you know, what I was feeling. He didn't really understand because he'd never been there. And so I think that was a really important chapter for me to tell and to interview people who, you know, there's an empathy fatigue that goes on, I think, when you're dealing with someone who has a chronic mental health challenge. I mean, we've dealt with that even in our own family. You know, I mean, I wrote a book about this. I've struggled with it myself, but, you know, someone very close to me has had very significant challenges, much worse than I. And it's hard in the long term dealing with it day after day after day. And it just becomes overwhelming and exhausting. So trying to understand the perspective of someone who's suffering is super important. And I think, you know, that was the point of that chapter and the point of interviewing my husband, who could give some really interesting perspective in a way that, you know, that I needed to understand. He needed to understand me and I needed to understand him too.
Jane, what was the time frame for you with the research of your book, with the desires to write the book? What was the time frame from your mental health experience, the challenges that you were facing, and was this part of a therapeutic effort that you were doing, or obviously you wanted to help other people because you had pulled out? Thoughts on that?
Well, I guess, yeah. As a journalist, I felt like that was my pattern in life, you know, was to take a subject, to interview people, to understand all sides of a problem or an issue, and then pull it all together and sort of, you know, cull through the information and to create some sort of understanding or narrative. That's what I did as a journalist. That's what I do as a journalist. And so when I had this happen to me, that was sort of my default position. That's sort of where I went when I needed to make sense of what was happening to me. So after I had gone through that period of depression and that really difficult experience, I started talking to people about what had happened to me and realized that there were so many people who were going through something very similar. And so I started sort of putting these pieces together and realizing, wow, this is a story. In my vernacular, this is a story. I mean, there is so much suffering. There is so much unneeded stigma that we need to, you know, kind of dispel. And so I just started a journalistic effort to kind of, you know, with spreadsheets and Google Docs and, you know, started calling people around the country. And before you knew it, 3 years had passed and I'd interviewed, you know, all these people and had collected all these stories. And it was an effort not just to help other people, but it was really somewhat selfishly to understand myself and to really put the pieces of my experience together, because I think it's very lonely when you're in the pit of despair. It's very lonely when you're, like I described it as someone had thrown me into a burlap sack and tied the top and then just left me in a cave somewhere, and it was dark and it was cold and I couldn't get out. And the loneliness of these moments, I think that was an overwhelming theme. An overwhelming theme of my interviews was the loneliness and despair. And so it was for me as much as it was for those that I was trying to help. And to be honest, every single person that I interviewed jumped at the opportunity to share their experience and to share what they had been through in the hopes of helping someone else, in the hope of being able to turn their experience from a very, very difficult one into something that was meaningful to somebody else. And also, every person that I spoke with said that talking about their experience helped. It helped them, and it helped those people around them understand them better.
Well, those are some very empowering statements of people who had been or were silently suffering, that they felt better sharing their stories because their thought process is, if I can help somebody else, then it's worth it to share my own pain. So, Jane, how do we start these conversations with people, and how do we respond? Oftentimes we hear, like, I care, but I don't know what to say. How would you address that?
So, writing down a couple of thoughts. I think starting is as simple as just doing it. I think starting is as simple as not being overwhelmed with the prospect of, I have to tell the world, I have to wear this on my sleeve, I have this terrible problem, how am I going to, fix it or solve it? It's as simple as finding a friend, finding someone that you trust, and opening up. And not being afraid to show weakness, to show vulnerability, and to share your experience, share your heartache. And if you're on the other side of that person who's sharing, if you're on the other side of that person who's pouring their heart out to you, please listen. Just listen. Don't try to solve their problem right away. Listen to what they're saying. Take it in. Express empathy. Validate their experience. Even if you have to pull from the depths of your soul to find some way that you can connect. Help that person understand that you're a safe place to go, that you're a safe place to share. And then, if you can help in a bigger way, please do. I've had friends who've made doctor's appointments for their girlfriends. I've had friends who've taken in people into their home because they knew they weren't safe and they knew they probably wouldn't make it through the night. They brought them into their world and helped keep them safe until the sun rises and things get a little brighter. So share, be vulnerable, just take one step toward trusting someone enough to do that. And on the other side, listen, empathize, validate, and take action if you can.
Jane, I know once somebody's experienced, a major mental health challenge, and they get the help that they need, and it might be medication sometime for a period of time. It might just be, therapy. And they get out of that. They get out of that pit, and they go on, and there seems to be a lot more hope. There seems to be a lot more goodness in life. And there is sometimes, though, for a lot of people, they might have a major event and then go for some time after that without one. But there is sometimes a pull from that mental health experience, their brain chemistry, or a multitude of factors, where once again they experience the same thing, or they experience something similar to it. How can we help people with that? Because I think sometimes people get really disheartened by the fact that they're able to pull out of a major depressive episode or severe anxiety. They're able to modulate it and control it. And then with time, all of a sudden things creep back in, their brain chemistry creeps back in. What would you have to say with that? Because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that they might have to deal with some of those things again in their life, and it's something that they might have to continue to be on the watch for.
You're absolutely right, and I'm so glad that you asked this question because I think it's really important. I think for me, I'll just speak from my own experience. I am always aware that if it happened once, it could happen again. And so I have been extra diligent since that experience about really taking care of myself, to be mindful of my thoughts, of my emotions, of, and also of my habits, of my self-care habits. Am I eating well? Am I exercising regularly? Am I moving my body? Am I getting out and socializing? Am I creating a milieu in my life where I feel that I'm doing something that's making me, where I feel productive, that I feel happy and fulfilled? Do I have a hobby where I can, express myself spiritually, physically, emotionally, creatively? So I think that's a multifaceted response, and I think it's an excellent question because, I think, again, I take the pill and I'm done. I do the therapy for a few months and it's over. No, I still go in for tune-ups, as I call it. I still have a therapist that I see, not infrequently, who helps me, kind of see things in a way that maybe I'm a little warped. Maybe my perspective needs to shift a little bit. My husband's also really good at that. But I'm aware, and I don't, I take pride in taking care of myself. I think as moms especially, we're always making sure that the kids are good and this person's taken care of, and we're serving the world. And I think we feel guilty about taking care of ourselves. As women especially, I think men, not to, mischaracterize, but I think as women that happens, not infrequently. And so I give permission. I grant permission for you to take a few minutes every day and do something that you enjoy. And I know when you have little kids running around, it's hard. I get that. But there are ways, to do that, whether you have babysitting, sharing, or, finding a way. Lock yourself in the closet for 10 minutes. Go into the bathroom and close the door, and you'll see those little fingers coming up under the door. Mommy's taking a break, You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to respect the need for your body to be healed. And that happens every single day.
Well said.
Very much so. Jane, are there any closing comments that you'd like to share or make? This has just been such an enlightening conversation with some practical tools and tips that we can all use.
Well, I just first would say thank you for the invitation, and I really can't stress enough how important it is for people like you to create opportunities for people to discuss these issues. I believe it from the bottom of my heart. It is a passion. It is my strong belief that if we open up about our challenges, if we share and slowly, step by step, express vulnerability, let go of the perfectionism that I think so often infiltrates and infects our culture and our society. Get off social media. Stop comparing yourself to your favorite person this and perfect person that. There is hope and there is help. And if you're struggling and if you're suffering right now, I hope you hear me, and I hope you internalize this in some way, that people have been there. They have gone through what you're going through. And we've made it to the other side, and there is hope for you too. So thanks to you both for creating these opportunities for dialogue, for awareness, for understanding. And I appreciate it very, very much. And I thank you. So thanks.
We're so grateful to be able to have, a person like you champion a cause like this, and it's a real honor for us to visit with you. And we look forward to meeting you in person.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you as well, and I really am grateful for the opportunity to come to Logan, and I'll see you soon.
All right.
Right. Thank you, Jane. What a delight.